morning, everyone. I'm Nimmy, and the topic of my topic today is I'm going to talk about these things: the what, why, how, where, and when of research. So I'll just briefly give an idea about these things. What is research? What is science? And what is research? Why do we do research? And this is a main thing I want to really talk about: how to do research, or are there any traits to do good science or for good research. That is kind of what I would like to focus a little bit more on. And the where of research, a small portion will be taken by me, and the majority of that will be taken by Dr. Shafiq in the next session. And when, there is really no, I can't say there's an ideal time for research. You can do research anytime. It need not culminate in a PhD. You can do research even regardless of whether you're doing a PhD. So hopefully by the end of all these, the entire session on research, you'll get an idea whether you want to do research, whether this is a field or this is an area which excites you. So also I'd like to take this opportunity to really appreciate the work Canford and Mentor Hub is doing. It's really exciting to be a part of such an initiative. I think research is an excellent theme to start off with, because it's a personal confession. When I started off research, I didn't know a lot of things I was doing. I learned a lot on the way, sometimes much after the experiments were conducted, much after I did the analysis and the interpretation. That's when I realized, okay, I made a mistake there. So there's no regrets whatsoever. It's all the lessons are learned in good spirit, but still, it's really nice if, especially students who are still in school, if they get to know first-hand account of what is research and what goes into doing good science, or how can you pursue good science. I think that's a good thing. The outline of what I'm going to talk about are these things: what is science, and why do we do it, how, where, and when. Okay, so what exactly is science? Science is basically a very systematic way of exploring the nature of reality. So think you have an idea. You have an idea, and in science, what we basically do is we do a lot of experimentation. In fact, we test this. We put it to experimentation, and only by testing we can either prove or disapprove a theory. And that's the beauty of science, that everything is open to question, everything is open to scrutiny. So if you're doing research, or even if you're doing a PhD, this is a very common thing. Once in 6 months or once in a year, you'll have a meeting where you're presenting your findings, and this will mostly be with a panel which includes subject experts, maybe even people who are not exactly in your area of expertise. So what is happening there is you're actually opening your findings to scrutiny and to revision, and that's what makes it possible to come up with better discussions. So this is how I would like to define science. Science is a very specialized way of being wrong. So every scientist tries to be slightly less wrong than the scientist who came before them, and it's purely evidence based. So that's what I think is science. And research, this is a really wonderful quote by Albert Szent-Györgyi. He is the scientist who he won the Nobel Prize for isolating vitamin C, which was then used in treating scurvy. He said this, that research is to see what everybody else has seen and to think what nobody else has thought. So sometimes it's out there, but just a very few people may have the perspective to see it in a very different way. So research is actually an ongoing process of learning new things. And sometimes it happens that you have to let go of your pet hypothesis, something you thought was true, you may have to let go of it. So every time you do a research, every time you do an experiment, what you're basically understanding you're getting closer to the truth. And sometimes it involves letting go of wrong ideas or ideas you thought to be true. And a very, very important part of research is that you can never say research is finished. Even when you finish a PhD, or even when you finish a degree and you're studying something, you can never say that research is ever complete or it's ever finished. And if at all you're ever taking up research, this is very important. Whenever you see a scientific paper, or when you're reading something, maybe the headline goes like, new study shows that a particular food, maybe oranges, help in treating can be used in curing a particular condition. Always take it with a grain of salt, because one study never proves anything. You need to have a lot of studies, a lot of science, a lot of research has to go into it in order to come up with the with the ultimate reality. So in the best, you can say science doesn't offer perfect truth, only the best available truth, only with the best instrumentation, only with the best source of knowledge we have as of now. And why do we do research? We do research because I personally think science is the best idea humanity has ever had. In order to come up, in order to test something and even let go of that idea, only based on evidence, that is what actually moves science forward and moves humanity forward. And we have so many phenomenal stories in science and research, and that's actually the true inspiration to get into a field where you want to pursue research. Now, this is actually the area I want to talk about. How do you go about doing research? Is there a way you can, or are there some ways you can start getting into research, or even is there any way you can get into it? So, I've just written 4 things here. Like for instance, intuition or belief. Okay, I'd like to give an example. Like for instance, let's assume that there's this health drink which I think is extremely beneficial, which I think is really good for my health. I would also go so far as to say that it helps me in improving my vision, it helps me in improving my memory, etc. So at the end of the day, you should remember that it's just an intuition, it's just a belief, a strong held belief that I hold. But just because I have a belief or such an intuition, is it true? Is it true that this health drink may be actually beneficial? I'm talking more from a scientific point of view, as in if you're doing research on this. So the answer to it is no. Just because you believe in something or just because your gut says so, you can't say that something works, or at least that's not sound science. What about the second thing? What if you take a consensus? A consensus is, for instance, I ask 10 to 20 people I know. I ask them the same thing. Do you think this drink is beneficial, or when you've had it, do you think it actually works? And they all say, yeah, this works. But can that be considered as science, or can that be considered as something scientifically sound? Again, no. Consensus is by no ways scientifically sound evidence. What about authority? What if you're taking an expert opinion? For instance, you're asking a scientist or maybe a doctor or even a political leader. Can you really say their advice is scientifically sound? Not really, because even if it's a scientist or a doctor, remember their personal opinions are also can be kind of biased. So even authority is not the right way to go about doing research. Better than the first 3 things are casual observation. For instance, let's assume I'm having this drink and I'm casually observing that, okay, my eyesight has become better, maybe after having this drink, maybe over after 2 weeks. But that's a very casual observation. I'm not even methodically even noting it down, like, seeing whether my eyesight has improved because of this drink, or maybe I'm using some eye drops. There can be we call these things confounders. There may be something else which has contributed to this benefit and not the drink as such. So in other words, I can say none of these things are scientific. They're all non-scientific. So what is scientific then? Or how can you do science in a more scientific manner? You start out by drawing or by framing a hypothesis. So a hypothesis is nothing but you're making a statement. The statement would explain a phenomenon, or it would describe a pattern. Like in my case, I'm saying I have this health drink and it's improving my vision, or it's improving my memory, for instance. And whatever the hypothesis you're making, it would be on the basis of some evidence. It may be, maybe I have read in a research paper that this particular health drink, which contains maybe aloe vera, etc., is excellent for treating, poor eyesight. It could be that. So you will frame a hypothesis from an idea. Okay, so you frame the hypothesis, but what next? You should definitely not go for the other 4 non-scientific ways I spoke about. What next? You could go for very scientific principles of actually estimating whether your hypothesis is correct. So these are some 6 principles which are extremely important. I'll just explain it very briefly. So the first principle is for a hypothesis to be scientifically sound is that it should be empirically testable. What do you mean by empirically testable? It means I should be able to test it. For instance, I want to test that this drink actually works. So what I would do, I would probably go to a physician, and I would go to an ophthalmologist and maybe just have my have an eye checkup and do it in a very methodical manner. There should be something by which I can quantify, or I can say that yes, there's been an improvement. So most of these things I'm presenting in this lecture, it's mostly from a course which I have stated down. You can take a look at that course. So in that, they've given a wonderful example of things which sometimes you cannot empirically test a few things. Some things cannot be empirically tested. So in this, they've given a rather simplified example, but I would like to quote that. They've said that, what if you think that, it's again a very simple example. What if you think that your cat likes you? So is there a way to empirically test that a cat likes you? Can your cat express his feelings? No, not in the way a human would. So how can we empirically test it? Some things can't be empirically tested. So that is the first and the most important thing when you're testing a hypothesis. It should be empirically testable. Next, it should be replicable. By replicable, I mean that I should be able to replicate the same thing. For instance, let's assume in the month of March, by testing it, I see that my eyesight has improved. What about in another month? Can it be replicated by a single individual? Can it be replicated? That's again a very important principle of accepting a hypothesis. The next is objectivity, and objectivity is so important, I can't emphasize it. And objectivity is not just important in research, but in general, even in your workplace, objectivity is a very important principle. What is objectivity? For instance, in my workplace, I do some kind of work, maybe it's some sort of documentation or some research. Even after I leave this place, if there's another person coming in my place instead of me, that person should also be able to replicate the same process I have done. As in, it shouldn't be dependent, the process shouldn't be dependent on the researcher. It should be independent of the researcher. As in, provided you've given you've given all the, how to go about the research, what is the right methodology, any other person with a basic scientific background should be able to replicate it. That is called objectivity, and it's a crucial and a very important part of scientific research. The next important aspect is transparency. So for instance, let's assume I'm doing this experiment. I should be able to specify each part of this research in a very transparent manner. For instance, I'm making this health drink. I should be able to say how I made it, what goes into this health drink, or did I heat it? If I heated it, for how long? And then after that, when I'm testing it, how frequently am I testing my eyes? Or in what, do I just read the Snellen eye chart? All those things, everything should be transparent such that another researcher anywhere in the world is able to replicate. That's an important aspect. The last two principles are a bit tricky to understand, but I'll try to explain. The fifth principle is called falsifiability, and that's a very interesting aspect. What falsifiability means is that every researcher should be open to the possibility that their hypothesis or whatever they think to be true may not be true. It may be false. So that is one of the major problems when you do research. Normally what happens is you get so drawn to the hypothesis, you get yourself attached to it and you want to prove it to be right. But the very important thing is you have to be open to the possibility that this may be wrong. So again, to give the example of this health drink, imagine I'm having this health drink and for some reason I'm not finding, at least empirically when I'm testing it, I don't find my eyesight has improved. But come what may, I have a strong attachment, or maybe I believe in herbs, I believe in plants. I think that whatever goes into this health drink is medicinally so important that there's no way it can be wrong. So that is actually it's a failure here if you're talking about it from a perspective of research. The last aspect is it should be logically consistent. I'll give an example here. Let's take the cat example. For instance, let's assume my hypothesis is that my cat likes me. So if my cat likes me, I have to test it. Empirically, I have to test it. And let's assume the way I'm going to empirically test it is maybe the cat likes to sit on my lap for a long time. And that's how I say that the cat likes me. But let's assume that during the experimentation, I noticed that the cat doesn't actually sit on my lap. And then I just change my hypothesis. I say that maybe the cat sees I'm working and the cat doesn't want to disturb me because he likes me. And you can see how I have actually twisted the hypothesis here just to fit the observation. So that again is not it's not a sign of or it's not indicative of strong, sound research. So whenever you see, if you're going into research, or whenever you see, a scientific paper, look for these things. Especially if you're going for research, you should be able to basically question your own hypothesis, question your own belief systems, and that's very important in research. So, hypothesis is a novel suggestion that no one wants to believe. You should think of it as guilty until it's found effective. You should always open yourself to the possibility that it may be wrong. So, how would you go about it? There's something called the empirical research cycle, how you would go about this process. And how you would start off with is you start off with the observation. Like, for instance, in this case, I have seen that a health drink may be health, maybe, it may be nutritious. So I think it may help me in improving my vision. And so I start off with the observation phase. And then what do? I can't just limit the observation to myself. I'll have to include more people in the study. So I enroll more people. Maybe just to give a simpler example, not to complicate it, what if I ask my colleagues to join, and 20, 30 of them, and I ask them also to follow the same routine I'm following, and have the drink for a frequent period of time, and then just see how they feel. I can go for the induction. But then does your eyesight improve? And if it improves, how long does it improve, and how am I testing it? That is a deduction. And then comes the testing phase. Testing phase it depends on how long you want to test it. You want to test it for a few months, or do you want to test it for a few years? And then finally you evaluate your results. And that's where statistics has a really important role to play. So because it so happens that, let me just give this example. Like, for instance, let's assume that once I've had the drink, possibly out of 30 people, maybe, let's say 20 people really observed an improvement in the vision. But it can also happen that there may be some other things which would have helped them in improving their vision. Maybe they were sleeping more, or maybe they were administering some eye drops, or maybe they were doing some eye exercises. So this is so important. Evaluation is a very, very important part of research. Finally, at the end of evaluation, you come up with a new observation, something new. And this is a very, very important part of research. You do not accept or reject a hypothesis. What you normally do is you provisionally, whatever observation you get, that will only provisionally support your hypothesis. Means, so far as whatever the best instruments and the best methodology you have, you find that this hypothesis is true. You can't completely accept it, neither can you reject it. So that is something about the empirical research cycle. Now, how about, are there any traits for doing good science, or being following or doing good sound science? There are a few, I would say. And I think one of the most important things, or how you come up with progressive science, is not by just stumbling across something, not just by exclaiming Eureka. Sometimes it's about, finding something odd, or just saying, this is funny. I need to really find out what is odd about this. And I need to question. And sometimes it starts by questioning your own belief systems. So that is a very important aspect, I think, being curious and being a little skeptical, not just believing research as in how you see it. And again, you can never stop questioning, never stop learning, because it's you need to be open to learn new things, so that you come up with better evidences, and you have better evidences to prove your hypothesis. And this is so important. So William Osler said this, that in science, the credit goes to the man who convinces the world, not to the man to whom the idea first occurs. At first sight, you might think it's a bit unfair, but in terms of science and research, it's actually true. Sometimes many people have the idea for the first time, but it's very few who are able to convince, or who are able to explain it in a very simplified manner to the public. And there I feel like that includes myself. I can sometimes, complicate matters. I think it's a very scientific thing. You use a lot of scientific jargons, and sometimes the message is lost in that. So it's so important that when you're in research, communication is extremely important. And that by communication, I meant in writing. You need to be able to simplify and tone down the science, especially to somebody who's not in your area, somebody who's not in your field, who doesn't know the basic principles or the underlying theory. You need to be able to explain it to them. And I think that starts not just while you're doing research, it can actually start much before. Like, If you can improve your writing skills, that would go a long way. So I can say these are the major traits. You should be curious, a lifelong learner. Being imaginative really helps. Have good communication skills, as in good writing skills. And I think ethics are really, really important. You should not form an attachment to your pet hypothesis and just think that you should prove it come what may. You should be open to scrutiny, open to questions, and that's how science moves forward. So here I have actually, there's this digital repository, it's called Shodh Ganga. So if you're doing a PhD, what happens is your dissertation or your thesis is normally uploaded in this website. So you can actually just Google Shodh Ganga and you'll get this website. So in this website, what you can do is you can actually look for thesis from different areas. So here I have actually seen it based on this subjects. So you can see in chemistry, there are over 25,693 dissertations as of yesterday. So if you're interested in any such area, what you can do is you can just go to that particular subject, look for thesis, look for the topics, and kind of at the first thing, especially if you're in school, I think the first step is to read, to be open to the possibility of just reading, sometimes even if you don't understand the science behind it. So this particular topic will be taken in a lot of detail and you'll understand it better in the next session. So I'm just going to say, regardless of whichever area you're in, you may be in architecture, you may be in law, you might go into law in future, or finance, engineering, medical sciences. Regardless, you can do a PhD, you can pursue research in any of these areas. So regardless of the area, I just think you need to adhere to some scientific principles that I had mentioned. That goes about making science progressive. It takes, science forward. So this is a interesting dissertation. This was submitted by a student in MIT. It's a case study in where they're trying to find out, whether they can make houses in Bhuj in Gujarat. It's extremely hot there, so they've used a specific housing material in order to make cooler houses. So when you take up such a dissertation, you can just look into that. Really, when the researchers did it, they try to see that it is empirically testable. Do you think it could be replicated, especially if you're going to research in that area? So that's a place you can start in, if you are in research or if you're considering it. This is another very interesting study where they have seen how, the spider web geometry could actually help you in making these roof trusses. And this in medical sciences also, you can pursue research in medicine, in dentistry, in nursing, or in pharmacy. I'm from the pharmacy background, or in allied health sciences, like for instance, in physiotherapy, in occupational therapy, in speech and hearing, in laboratory technology. These are really nice areas, really open to a lot of research possibilities, especially now. So even if this sounded a little complicated and you're not really interested in research, I think a good area to start would be to read a little bit more about science, apart from science textbooks. And I think this is a very nice place to start, maybe just by reading a little bit more on evolution, or maybe there's a really nice book called Bad Science by Ben Goldacre. So you can understand what is good science. When you read the book, you'll know what are the wrong scientific practices, and that might help you in future. And there are some really nice books on the pandemic and malaria. These are some really nice reading, which kind of makes you think a lot more. And if you're interested in doing a course, these are some really, really good courses. There's this course called Quantitative Methods. Most of the material I've used in my slides is from this particular course. It's a wonderful course. It may look a little complicated, but it's a very nice course to begin with. And if you want to improve your writing, I would definitely recommend the second course. It's called Writing in the Sciences. The best thing about this is you can even do this even if you're studying in school. It's a very interesting course. It kind of tells you, there are some common mistakes we make. We are taught to use passive voice while writing. So the faculty actually says you should actually use active voice while writing, and it makes writing a lot easier to read. And the other two courses are also really, really good. So you can take a look at that. And yeah, any questions?